With the DLC finally out, here is the first DLC build that I'm going after, and it is the Greatsword of Solitude. This is a really fun weapon, and you get it incredibly early in the DLC, and if you're a strength user, this one is going to be right up your alley because it's a lot of fun to play with. So, I put together a build that I think synergizes very, very well, but per usual, if there's something that you would change, leave it down in the comments below. So, let's get into it. Also, just a disclaimer here before we get started, I do want to let you guys know that there are going to be some clips from the DLC in here, so minor spoilers ahead. I'm not super far into the DLC, but I have killed 2 Remembrance bosses, so just keep that in mind. You are also going to see some Mimic tier gameplay when I'm fighting some of these DLC bosses, because hey, they're super hard, and I wanted to show you the build. It still shows the damage of the build, there's just a Mimic tier there. But the difference between the DLC difficulty and then when you take this weapon into the vanilla game is absolutely astounding. The Greatsword of Solitude destroys bosses, has excellent stagger potential, so we're going to be building around the physical damage and the stagger potential of this weapon. We have a lot going for that, so let's go ahead and jump into what is my favorite part of the build, and that's the weapon. Starting off, the Greatsword is going to have really awesome physical damage at plus 10. We have 294 plus 544, giving us an astounding amount of physical damage, and then we're going to have a strength scaling of A and a dex scaling of D. It does take 27 strength to wield and 13 dexterity, and if you did want to do a guard counter build with this, you could do that as well because you get an 89 in physical damage negation. Now, where this weapon really excels is its solitary moon slash. The fun thing about a lot of these weapons that I'm finding in the DLC is the fact that mobility is really big. Typically on a greatsword you don't see a lunge like you do with this Ash of War, and it really gives an entirely new playstyle to using a greatsword. But the first slash is very reminiscent of the Gargoyle's greatsword, giving you almost like a blasphemous blade Ash of War, but then the second aspect of this Ash of War is a lunge forward and a vertical slash. It's very good, it does a ton of damage, and we've built around that as well. If you are looking to pick up this weapon, it is very early in the DLC, but it is a little bit difficult to get. This is the very first gear check you're going to have in this game, and the Western Nameless Mausoleum is where you're going to find this greatsword. The NPC who drops it is very challenging, especially when you first enter the DLC, so just be careful of that. Next up, we are going to be looking at our Flask of Wondrous Physic. Now, this is just going to be your typical stagger build flask with the Stone Barb Crack tier, which is going to temporarily make stance break easier, as well as the Spike Crack tier, temporarily boosting charged attack power. Both of those are going to stack very well, and they're also going to synergize well with our Talismans, which is why I chose them. The Stone Barb Crack tier is going to give you 30% stance and 30% stamina damage, and the Spike Crack tier is going to give you 15% charged attack damage. I have also found that if you don't want to go as hard on the stance damage as I am, you can use a Stamina Crystal tier, because I have noticed that this build does lack for some stamina, especially in some clutch moments. That being said, it is still very manageable, and these tiers will do you just fine. Now, the Stone Barb Crack tier is going to be located at the Minor Erd Tree in Caelid on the eastern side after you defeat the Putrid Avatar, and the Spike Crack tier is going to be found at the Minor Erd Tree in the Mistwood, right there on the little altar. And guys, real quick, thank you so much for sitting here watching my videos and supporting my content. I want you guys to know that I'm incredibly thankful. You could be watching any video on the internet, and you're watching mine right now. So, with that being said, thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe while you're here, and let's get into the rest of the video. So let's go ahead and look at how this build operates. We're going to be taking a look at our talismans here, and the first talisman we're going to be using is the Green Turtle Talisman. I mentioned before that stamina can be a little bit of an issue with this build, and I didn't want to put any more in endurance than I already had. This is a level 150 build, so I only had a little bit to work with. But the Green Turtle Talisman is going to raise our stamina recovery speed by 17.7%. This is going to be super important, especially when using a greatsword, and the fact that your Ash of War also uses stamina. This is overall just going to be a very helpful talisman for you. Next up, we have the Shard of Alexander for obvious reasons. Having our Ash of War hit for 15% extra damage is definitely the way you want to go, and I couldn't put together this build without it. Next up, we have the Axe Talisman, which is going to be synergizing perfectly with our Flask of Wondrous Physic. The Axe Talisman is going to give you a plus 10% charged attack damage buff, meaning when it's combined with your Flask of Wondrous Physic, you're going to get around 25 or 26% extra charged attack damage for those heavy charged R2s to hit extra crispy. This is going to allow you to break stances with ease, and you're also going to be pouring out a ton of damage with this talisman setup. And finally, for our last talisman, we have a new talisman in the lineup. This is going to be the Blade of Mercy. Now, the Blade of Mercy is interesting because it is actually going to give you extra attack power each time you get a critical hit. This is a really interesting way to play, but because we are breaking stances a lot and we are getting critical hits, we're going to be taking full advantage of this talisman. Now, this critical hit window is going to last anywhere between 15 and 20 seconds. When I was doing the testing, it was right around that time. However, I'm not 100% sure just how much your attack power is going to get raised from this. I believe it's 10%, but leave it down in the comments below if you guys know. Now, as far as where all these talismans are located, the Green Turtle Talisman is going to be located in Summon Water Village within Limgrave after you use a Stone Sword key. The Shard of Alexander is going to be at the end of Alexander's questline, and I will leave that video down in the description below. The Axe Talisman is going to be found early game in the Mistwood, right in the Mistwood ruins down a staircase. And the Blade of Mercy is going to be our DLC talisman we're using that is going to be at the beginning of the DLC, right inside the Scorched Ruins in a chest on the tallest building. And lastly, before we get into the stats of the build, we do need to go over the buffs that I'm using. I am using Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow, and I wanted to get 24 Faith for this build because the DLC is difficult. I find that having Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow to give you that extra 15% damage negation as well as 25% extra physical damage is extremely worth it. I tried to do this without buffs and it worked, but it didn't work as well as I wanted it to. So with that being said, Flame Grant Me Strength is going to be found very early in the game within Caelid, right on the side of Fort Gale. And if you want to get the Golden Vow incantation, you're going to need to go all the way up to Mount Gelmir to the Corpse Stench Shack. And lastly, we have the stats for this particular build. As you can see, Vigor is a little bit high. We have Vigor at 65, Mind is at 14, Endurance is at 30, Strength is at 80, Dexterity is 22, Intelligence is 12, Faith is at 30, and Arcane is at 16. I'm also using Godric's Great Rune to make those stats go a little bit higher when it's activated, but overall I found that these stats go very well for the build. You're doing a decent amount of damage in Shadow of the Erdtree, and you're also absolutely crushing the vanilla game. This is a level 150 build, and I think it's going to treat you guys just fine. And guys, that is going to be it for the video. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe and like on your way out. I have a ton more builds coming and YouTube shorts hitting the channel every single day, so make sure to subscribe for that. And until next time, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.